Hi, so I did my document analysis on the Freedom Riders. I've heard about them before, so I knew some sort of background already about them, but I found the documentary very interesting just with its ideas and how I didn't realize how in depth it got. And so the Freedom Riders were a group of white and African American people who tried to change segregation in the South. The main goal was to show that whites and blacks could integrate with each other. This was going on at the time where Jim Crow and everything was in the South and when the KKK was popular, so they were targeting these African Americans and the whole idea of separate but equal from Plessy versus Ferguson. But even though that Supreme Court case was overturned by Brown versus Board of Education, there was still this whole idea of racism and hatred of African Americans in the South. So the goal of this movement was for the Freedom Riders to go out in buses. It wasn't just African Americans either. It was white people and African Americans who joined together to go on these buses. And basically their goal was to do nonviolence. They wanted it to be nonviolent. Their goal was to integrate whites and blacks in public places, because that wasn't very common in the South because of the already hatred from the Jim Crow era and from just what the South was like. So while the writers might not have known what exactly they're getting themselves into, those who stayed made the most impact. So I heard the different stories from them and how they didn't really know what to expect. They did, but they didn't know how serious it was going to be and how much of feelings of hatred or support that they were going to get, because they met with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. outside of Alabama and they wanted him to join them on their journey, but he decided not to because he heard from the NAACP group of people that there was going to be a riot and everything in Alabama. And the Freedom Riders thought it wasn't going to be as terrible as it actually was. So once they went into Alabama on their bus, they were attacked by members of the KKK and white supremacists, and they were beaten. They were attacked by police even, and that to me was just incredible of how people who could go through that could keep going on into that movement and keep going and fighting for what they believed in. And that to me is what a movement is about. It is how you feel so passionate about a topic and how you have such strong emotions that you will do anything to make things right. And that's all they wanted to do. They just wanted to make it right. But some people didn't even want that. So I was looking through the book, and in chapter 10, it was talking about how you have to be fully committed to a cause to stick with it in order for a cause to succeed. Because if, let's say I start a movement and I'm the head and it gets too rough for me and I drop out, well, people aren't going to listen to that movement because they'll see even the leader has dropped out. So for them to keep going and trying and fighting for their rights, that to me is just amazing in itself. And how they were just students. They weren't full-grown adults. They were just students working for a movement, and how even though they were attacked, it was just amazing how they kept through it. And how also in the book how I mentioned how you have to have some sort of idea. You can't just go up one day and just start a movement. You have to have some sort of idea in your head of what you want to do and how you're going to do it and what point you're trying to make, because sometimes people might seem like things are different and sometimes they won't get your message and what you mean. So I think it's very important to think of a goal, and how you perceive that goal is very important too, because with them, they wanted to be nonviolent. They just wanted to do sit-ins where you would go and just, well, sit in at a place that was all white people, and then they have colored people and white people sitting together at a lunch counter. That was enough to start calling the police in the South. If, excuse me, colored people, or African Americans, I guess, colored people is an old term, but African Americans, if they're sitting at the counters, that's enough to call the police and to get them arrested and get them in trouble. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to show that you could integrate whites and blacks in public spaces. And I think some people didn't get that message that they wanted to do. They thought that they were going to be violent. They thought, because at the time too, some white people in the South thought that all African Americans were just violent and nasty people. But with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.